All right, Packers. This is the cultural shifts assignment, kind of your last, not kind of, it is your last assignment of Unit 7 about World War II. Man, are we leaving out some good, rich stuff from the World War II story. But we really could spend the rest of the year on it and we'd still leave stuff out. So we just have to, at some point, draw a line in the sand, and the day before a 4-day weekend or the class period before a 4-day weekend is I think the right one to do. So you've got the notes open. I know the video link doesn't show up, but you've got the notes open. And then what you'll be graded on is simply the way you score on this learning check. And what I think is so great about so many of these facts, this is really all just stuff that really we should have a day for each of them, and we just run out of time, whether we're doing distance learning or whether it's just um, different things in a traditional day. We just always run out of time to cover all the good topics. But these three, I think, are particularly important, or I'll be honest with you, I just think they're interesting too. So the first event that's really tied to all of these events aren't about the actual war in the sense of the people with the guns making the decisions, living and dying, but this is about how the war impacts everything else. And we're going to see that, and that's why I think these three ideas are so interesting, because we're going to see that with this pandemic too. We're going to see not just the story of the doctors and the nurses and the people getting sick, but then we're going to see these ripple effects. And that's where history can be really helpful as we look at what are the ripple effects. So, one ripple effect of World War II was the Great Migration, in part related to something we already know, Executive Order 8802. If we think back to that one, right, that's when FDR said that if you're going to sell weapons or other supplies to the US military, you can't discriminate. Also, as we have known and will know, there's lots of racism in lots of places. So a lot of things coupled with these job opportunities push a lot of Americans, but in particular African Americans, push them in a new direction. Physically, they move. So what we see is, what we see are African American families leaving the American South, technically the Southeast, but they leave the South for California, for Chicago, for Detroit, New York. Why? Because of all these factory jobs. And so it totally changes the United States demographically, the way things are made up. What's one of the big questions now in 2020 with the pandemic? Will we get the census? Will we get the count of where everyone lives? And will there be part of this pandemic that forces people to move? Do people get sick of living in these huge cities? We know New York City, particularly badly, it was the worst hit in America. Will people leave New York? Right. So there we have this connection of the Great Migration of African Americans leaving the American South and looking for factory jobs. Okay. Now this okay boomer one, right? Now I got to go with this, right? Because this was kind of the meme of 2019 is if an older person, at least this is the way the meme originated, maybe it means different things in your circles now. But the phrase okay boomer, an older person who just doesn't get it, an older person who's trying to tell you how to do something or whatever, and you just kind of do the eye roll and say, okay, boomer. I know the meme kind of took on different meanings, but is the root of it, right? So how does that relate to World War II, right? This part I know you talked about in 7th grade, but I just really wanted to highlight it because of that meme. So the war is this ultimate social distancing, right? People aren't just avoiding people on the street. They're friends, families, loved ones all over the world, as we've studied, right? In North Africa, in Europe, in Asia, which we did not study enough, okay? And so people are apart from their loved ones, and young people serve in significant numbers. So the class of 2020, right? These 18, 17, 18, 19-year-olds going out into the world. They all, at this time, were pushed into military service or just a different kind of lifestyle. So when the war's over, those young people, let's say um, Pearl Harbor, you go down after Pearl Harbor and you sign up to be in the Marines. So 1941, 1942, 1943, 1944, into 1945, those years, if you sign up when you're 18, 19 years old, you've been in the military. It doesn't count for everybody, but that's a long time to be living a life that was not what you had planned. Okay? So the end of the war kind of represents now the beginning of the rest of their life. And they want to stop the social distancing. They want to be together with their high school sweetheart, or they want to meet somebody on the street, fall in love, and start families, right? And they do that in record setting numbers. They start families. And so their kids become known as the baby boomers because after the war was over, there was a boom of babies being born, of young people ready to begin the rest of their life. So if you're a boomer, that means that your parents were part of the World War II generation. Doesn't necessarily mean, like my parents, for example, are for sure boomers. They're born in 1952. Neither of their parents fought in the war, but they were definitely part of that generation. So you can see this disconnect on why boomers are frustrated by this meme because the people they looked up to and had a lot of respect for were the generation that fought in World War II. And now, as they become older, they're part of this meme of just eye rolling and like, whatever, you baby boomers, what do you know? And they're kind of like, well, I know that my dad or my mom was involved in World War II or whatever. So that's just kind of the juxtaposition of those two phrases. Um, and then these two great phrases, or two great terms, right, that are part of American history, part of U.S. history, but come from their roots, right, in Latino or Hispanic culture, right? So the first one that's really important and oftentimes misunderstood is this Bracero program, okay? This was a U.S. government program where the U.S. government literally went to Mexico and said, please come here. Please come to the United States of America. We need workers. Now, the road was not easy for those bracero workers. It was not something that was super empowering in the sense of they were not treated respectfully oftentimes. But the key was the government needed more workers. Why? Because so many other adults were in the war. So this Bracero program was going on before the war, but through the war and beyond. And what that led to was this Pachuco culture, right? And so this is where we get into some cool vocabulary words, a cultural hybrid. Cultural having to do with how you identify as a group, and a hybrid, which is a mixture. So it was neither Mexican nor traditional US culture, but it was a new blend of the two. And it was generally done by young people, not only Mexican Americans, or at the time, the term that they liked, Chicano, but African Americans as well, and other people, other groups took part in this culture. But it was just kind of a way of being young, excited, doing what you want, and in particular, dressing the way you wanted to. So we see this zoot suit fashion, which is these long coats, these baggy pants, oftentimes these wide brimmed hats. That was kind of the fashion signifier. But what it said was, I'm a person who's part of multiple cultures. I'm a young person, and I'm gonna live it up and have a good time. Now, as we read, as we could read, as we should read, huge discrimination, huge backlash against these groups, really with no other reason than racism, right? So in the same way that oftentimes, sometimes as teenagers, you're looked down on, you're looked at as quote unquote troublemakers, being loud, whatever. That's really what this Pachuco culture saw and felt, primarily in California, but elsewhere as well. So, all right, perfect. Kept both under 10 minutes. Feel good about that. And then you'll just have these notes and you'll have that learning check. And you can use these notes. You could even go back and have the video playing while you answer the questions. And then if you have finished assessment 7.1, if you are caught up on late work, your long weekend for U.S. history starts now. If you have questions about your assessment, if you have questions about a reassessment, or if you have issues with late work, now's the time to switch over and do that. Might have some mistakes. Email me the mistakes if you see them. And just let me double check to make sure I gave you all the answers, because I know I screwed up last time with that. Good. All right. Let me know what can do better. Let me know what I can do better. Please be safe and take care.